Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The desert stretched out like an endless ocean of golden sand beneath the scorching sun. Waves of heat distorted the horizon, making the distant temple of the flame god seem like a mirage. Cain squinted against the glare, wiping sweat from his brow, though it did little to ease the oppressive heat that baked the skin and dried the throat. The temple was real, and so were the flames that awaited him inside. He could feel it deep in his bones. The power lay within those ancient, weathered stone walls, buried beneath layers of scorching sand and blistering heat. The stories had warned him, the trial of fire would break him, body and soul, if he wasn't worthy. But Cain had long since stopped listening to warnings. His heart had been hardened by grief, his resolve tempered by a thirst for vengeance. What did he have left to lose? He approached the temple, each step an effort against the shifting sands that seemed to conspire to drag him back, away from his goal. His village had been reduced to ashes by an enemy he could not name. The fire had swept through without mercy, and in its wake, Cain had been left alone. His family, his friends, gone. The memories of that night burned brighter than the sun overhead, and the image of the flames devouring everything he loved played in his mind on an endless loop. The trial was his only answer. Legends whispered that those who survived the temple of the flame god would gain mastery over fire itself. Control of the very element that had taken everything from him. And with that control, Cain could unleash his fury upon those responsible. Ahead, the temple loomed, its massive stone structure half buried in the shifting dunes. The ancient walls were blackened by centuries of exposure to the harsh desert elements, yet the temple stood defiant against the sands of time. Its entrance was a gaping maw, dark and foreboding, as though it were a living thing waiting to swallow him whole. Cain's hand drifted to the hilt of his sword, though he knew no weapon would help him here. The trial was said to be a test of spirit, not of steel. He would have to rely on more than brute strength to survive what lay ahead. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the shadow of the temple and crossed the threshold. Inside, the air was stifling, thick with an almost tangible heat. The dim light cast long shadows on the walls, which were covered in carvings of flames, dragons, and ancient symbols Cain couldn't decipher. The stone beneath his boots radiated warmth, as though the entire structure was pulsing with the power of the fire that resided within. Ahead of him, the path split in two directions. A forked road, an early choice. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, doubt flickered in his chest. The legends hadn't spoken of this. Which way was the right way? And what lay down the wrong path? As he stood there, debating his options, a faint whisper filled the air, carried on the unseen wind. Cain. He spun around, sword half drawn, searching for the source of the voice. But the corridor behind him was empty, save for the faint flicker of heat dancing along the walls. He took a step back, and again the voice whispered, this time more insistent, Cain, follow me. It was a woman's voice, soft but commanding, and it sent a shiver down his spine despite the heat. He hesitated, then turned to the left, where the shadows seemed to deepen. He wasn't sure why, but something told him this was the way. His grip tightened on the sword's hilt as he moved forward, every step echoing in the hollow silence of the temple. The corridor twisted and turned, narrowing in some places, forcing Cain to crouch and squeeze through, only to open into wide chambers with ceilings so high they vanished into darkness. Along the way, he passed strange statues, figures of flame and fury, their eyes glowing faintly as if watching him. The heat grew more intense the deeper he ventured, and soon, the air itself seemed to ripple with fire. After what felt like hours of walking, Cain reached a vast chamber. In the center of the room, a massive brazier burned with a fierce, otherworldly fire, white-hot, pure, and bright. It was unlike any flame he had ever seen. There was no smoke, no crackle, just a steady, almost melodic hum that reverberated through the stone. "Cain," the voice whispered again, but this time, it wasn't outside of him. It was inside, echoing through his mind. He winced and pressed his palms to his temples, trying to shake the sound. "Who's there?" he called, his voice hoarse. "Show yourself." There was no answer, only the crackling silence of the fire. But Cain knew someone, or something, was here. The air was too thick with presence, too charged with energy for him to be alone. A shadow moved at the edge of the brazier's light, flickering and indistinct at first, but gradually taking shape. A figure emerged from the darkness, a woman, her body wreathed in flame. Her skin glowed like molten gold, and her eyes blazed with the intensity of 1,000 suns. She was both beautiful and terrifying, a living embodiment of the fire he sought to control. "Who are you?" Cain asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am the flame," she answered, her voice soft but powerful, like a flame licking at dry kindling. "I am the heart of the fire you seek. But tell me, Cain, why do you desire this power?" Her words hung in the air, heavy and burning. Cain swallowed hard, his throat dry as sand. "I need it, to avenge my family. My village was destroyed by fire, and I was powerless to stop it. With your power, I can make those responsible pay." The flame woman's gaze never wavered, but Cain could feel the weight of her scrutiny. "Revenge," she said, the word almost a hiss. "Is that all you seek? To destroy as you were destroyed?" Cain's jaw tightened. "I need justice." "And what is justice to you, Cain?" she asked, stepping closer. The heat radiating from her was nearly unbearable, but Cain held his ground. "Is it vengeance, cloaked in righteousness? Or do you truly understand the fire you wish to command?" He faltered, the conviction in his voice wavering. The memories of his burning village, of the screams and the smell of ash, surged in his mind. "I just want to make them pay for what they did." The flame woman circled him, her fiery form flickering like a living flame. "Fire is not a tool of vengeance. It is a force of nature, a power of creation and destruction in equal measure. To wield it is to understand both the power it offers and the price it demands. Are you willing to pay that price?" Cain's fists clenched at his sides. "I'll do whatever it takes." "Very well," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Then let the trial begin." Without warning, the flames from the brazier roared to life, filling the chamber with blinding light and searing heat. Cain stumbled back, raising his arms to shield his face, but the flames didn't touch him. Instead, they twisted and coiled around him like a living serpent, encircling him in a vortex of fire. And then the pain began. The pain coursed through Cain's body, not the physical burn of skin but a deeper agony, as if the fire was digging into his very soul. It tore through every memory, every scar left by his past, dragging them to the surface. He staggered, dropping to one knee, his hands clawing at the stone floor as the flames swirled around him, each tendril lashing at his mind, his village, his family. The fire that had consumed them. The relentless inferno that he couldn't fight, couldn't save anyone from. The images played over and over in his mind, vivid and unbearable. He could hear their screams, his mother, his sister, their cries for help, their faces lit by the glow of the flames, disappearing into the fire. And there he was, helpless, standing in the center of it all, powerless to stop any of it. Cain gritted his teeth, trying to push the memories away, trying to stand, but the weight of his grief pinned him down. The flames tightened their hold, forcing him to confront every moment of his failure, every drop of guilt that had festered inside him since that night. Do you understand now, Cain? The flame woman's voice echoed around him, distant and yet all-consuming. The fire doesn't only burn what's around you. It burns what's inside. Cain shook his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I don't want to feel this anymore. I just want it to stop. The flames flared brighter, their heat unbearable, yet Cain felt no physical burn. Instead, they seemed to sear into his soul, peeling back the layers of anger and hatred that had fueled him for so long. The flames showed him everything he had tried to bury, his helplessness, his fear, his guilt. You seek revenge, the voice continued, calm but relentless. But do you even know who you are avenging yourself against? You fight against shadows, driven by nothing more than your own pain. Is this what you want? To be consumed by the very fire you desire to control? Cain's vision blurred, his body trembling under the strain. He had come here to gain power, to control the flames and make those responsible pay for what they had done. But now, faced with the raw truth of his anger, his grief, he couldn't find the strength to answer. I need the power, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. I can't let them get away with it. The flame woman's face appeared before him, her fiery eyes narrowing as she studied him. Power is not given. It is earned. But tell me, Cain, what will you do when you have it? Will you burn the world to ashes in your search for vengeance? Cain opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His mind raced, trying to find an answer, trying to cling to the purpose that had driven him this far. But the truth gnawed at him, unrelenting. He didn't know who had destroyed his village. He didn't know who had lit the fire that had taken everything from him. He had no face to attach his hatred to, no name to curse. All he had was the fire itself, a nameless, faceless force of destruction, just as the flame woman had said. And now, faced with the possibility of wielding that same power, Cain found himself hesitating. If he controlled the fire, what would he become? Would he be any different from the force that had taken his family from him? Would he lose himself in the flames, consumed by the very thing he sought to control? The flames around him seemed to dim slightly, as if waiting for his answer. Cain clenched his fists, fighting the urge to collapse under the weight of his thoughts. He had come so far, endured so much. But the flame woman's question lingered in his mind, burning brighter than the fire itself. I don't know, he finally admitted, his voice raw with emotion. I don't know what I'll do. The flame woman's expression softened, and for the first time, Cain saw something in her eyes that wasn't fire. Understanding. That is the first honest thing you've said, she murmured. You've carried your anger for so long, Cain, but it is not the fire that will destroy you. It is your own heart. The words cut through him, sharper than any blade. He had been running from the truth for so long, hiding behind his rage, telling himself that revenge was the only thing that mattered. But now, stripped bare by the flames, he couldn't deny it any longer. His anger wasn't his strength, it was his prison. The fire around him began to recede, the swirling vortex slowing, its heat dissipating into the air. Cain gasped for breath, his body shaking as the pain finally began to subside. The flame woman stood before him, her fiery form no longer menacing but almost peaceful. You must decide, Cain, she said softly. Will you continue to chase the flames of vengeance, or will you let them burn away what holds you back? Cain struggled to his feet, his legs unsteady but his mind clearer than it had been in years. He had spent so much time focused on revenge that he had lost sight of everything else. The fire had taken his family, but it didn't have to take him, too. I don't want to be consumed by this anymore, he said, his voice steadier now. I don't want to burn everything around me just to feel like I've won. The flame woman nodded, a flicker of approval passing through her eyes. Then you are ready. With a wave of her hand, the flames that had surrounded them vanished, leaving only the faint glow of the brazier in the center of the room. The oppressive heat lifted, replaced by a calm stillness that settled over the chamber. Cain felt the weight of his anger, his grief, begin to lift as well, as though the fire had burned it away, leaving behind something new. You have passed the trial of fire, Cain, the flame woman said, her voice reverberating through the stone walls. But remember this, fire is not a weapon of vengeance. It is a force of creation, of transformation. Use it wisely, or it will destroy you. Cain bowed his head, the weight of her words sinking in. He had come seeking power to destroy, but he was leaving with something far greater, the power to rebuild, to create. The flames had tested him, broken him down to his core, but in doing so, they had given him the strength to rise again, not as a vengeful force, but as something more. The flame woman's form began to flicker and fade, the last of her fiery essence dissipating into the air. But before she vanished completely, she spoke one final time, her voice barely a whisper. Go now, Cain, and let the fire within you burn bright, but not in anger, in hope. And with that, she was gone, leaving Cain alone in the quiet, empty chamber. The brazier's light dimmed, the heat finally fading as the trial of fire came to an end. Cain stood in the stillness, his heart lighter, his mind clearer than it had been in years. He had faced the flames, both outside and within, and emerged on the other side not as a man seeking revenge, but as a man seeking something far greater, peace. That he turned and made his way back through the temple, the path that had once seemed so daunting now lit by the faint glow of his newfound understanding. The desert stretched out before him as he stepped out of the temple's shadow, the sun high in the sky, its warmth no longer oppressive but welcoming. As Cain walked into the sands, leaving the temple behind, he knew his journey was far from over. But for the first time, he wasn't running from the past, he was walking toward the future.